Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Minal, fantastic to have you here. And to start with, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
Thank you, Alan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Minal Kering, and I have about 22 years of work experience in different corporate areas. But the one thing that is the most closest to my heart is mental health. And I'm a certified counselor in psychology. And I work with individuals and families to empower them in some way to work through their relationships, lives, overall mental health journeys. You can actually find me on Instagram. My handle is mindfully heartful with Meenal, or you can email me at meenal.kering@gmail.com. And thank you, Alan. I'm very excited to be a part of today's Values Jam.
Thank you, Minal. And mindfully heartful, I like that. So I'm guessing that you really focus on the personal dimension of that relationship rather than everything being focused in the head, right?
Absolutely. We've talked so much about mindfulness, right? And it is definitely important to see things in a pragmatic, practical way, to try and be present in the moment. But I feel if you haven't done something with your complete heart and soul into something, whether it is a school project or it is a work assignment or it is your relationships, I think there's always going to be a gap. And hence, uh, I've tagged the words together to make them mindfully heartful in anything and everything that you do.
Okay. And the other thing I'm curious about is probably the difference that you either have noticed or would explain between, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago compared to now, because um, I hear many conversations about, oh, people just need to get on with their lives, and we never had all of this attention when we were young, and all of that. So,
Absolutely.
give me your perspective on that difference that's
I
happened.
think even for us growing up in India, we were always told to have so-called a stoic mentality that just get on with it. It's all right. We didn't really get the luxury or the environment to say, it's all right. Take a pause and revisit what you need to. For us, it was go on, get to the finish line. I think now it's a little different, and I'm very, very grateful that all of us, youngsters and adults, do understand and hopefully will implement the whole concept of taking a pause, reflect on something's not right. What is it? Right? Is there something I can do about it? Am I putting too much of a focus on the environment around me? And I think it's really important. Uh, a lot of us use certain meditation techniques or mindfulness tips, whatever helps. I think the fact that you don't always have to get to the finish line at the first go. You can take a moment, revisit, or why did I go wrong? Or what happened? And then, as they say, you don't get successful the first time, and that's okay. You learn from what you've done, what you've not done, and make it right the second time, third time, and that's all right.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that you touch on there. So, first is how powerful a driver time is for us, and yet it doesn't have to be. I remember, I mean, maybe it's a silly example, but I was working on a project, not last year, the year before. We were supposed to be going live with an exhibition in October. And for whatever reason, we just weren't able to make that time frame. And when that became clear, my colleagues were kind of panicking, say, oh, we're not going to make it. And so I ended up saying, well, let's change it and let's explain
Absolutely.
why we're now going to go live in January. And as long as you explain why, nobody really notices or bothers in the end. And so there's,
Yes, because you are keeping a reality to everything,
yeah,
right? And it's all right. You can be human and things don't work out as planned. Just make newer goals.
yeah.
Oh,
And then the other thing is you touched on, I think you used the word success and you might have used failure. And I just find myself reacting against those two words because they come with such emotional baggage. And in whose eyes is it success or failure anyway? So it seems they seem to be not very helpful words.
I agree. And yet, I think everything that we do, even if you're a 40-year-old person working in an MNC or you are in school, all of the gradation is based on that. And that is something that, I hope we are changing or we can change for the future generations to come if it's not for us, right? Because success and failure are just terms. I
Yeah,
think it's also important the journey and the efforts that you put, not only focusing on the output.
yeah. Well, funnily enough, that's what Values Jam is about, right? We've no idea what the output is going to be. I've got the deck here, and I'm just going to tip the cards out. And what I'd like you to do is give me a number of piles that you would like me to make in front of me. I'll just shuffle the cards up a little bit more. So how many piles shall I lay out?
Let's say 8.
Eight. I think that's nearly the most. Oh no, I think I had somebody said 11 once.
Wow.
Okay, so there we have four, and now we have eight. So I've got two rows of four, the top row 1 to 4, and the bottom row 5 to 8. So which pile number would you like between 1 and 8?
Let's see, number 5.
Number 5. Okay. And in this one, there are 12 cards. So a number between 1 and 12, please.
Let's pick out card number 3 then.
Number 3. Wow. Okay. So what do you think of this one?
Uh, Very, very important. And
Courage.
one of my favorite values for sure.
So the first question is, what does courage mean? And what does it look, sound, and feel like?
Uh, to me, personally, courage, it just means getting up and moving on and going about what you need to do despite whatever's around you. It doesn't mean that you reach your goals immediately, but the fact that we keep trying and work on what we need to do more, what we need to do differently. And that, I think, is what courage is to me.
Okay. And how would you therefore describe the difference between courage versus words that I associate with what you've just described, such as persistence and determination? So, somebody who gets on whatever's around them, you could say, oh, they're persistent or they're determined. So, what is different about that person over there that is displaying courage?
I think courage, also to me, the word that comes to my mind is strength. So something like persistence or determination is actually how you go about using that courage that is pushing you forward. It's in a more disciplined manner that you're going to be consistent with something that you need to do. But for that, you need to have strength or you need to have courage, whether it is, emotional strength or mental resilience that we talk about. That is foremost. And then you can be persistent, consistent, determined to reach your goals, all of that.
Yeah, for me, there's I think with courage, there's somehow an element of either three things come to mind. One is risk, one is danger, and one is the unknown. So, if I think about persistence and determination, it might be that you see everything in front of you. It's just that it's a lot to do and it's hard work, and you carry on and you carry on, you carry on. But for courage, there's something about, well, you're still going to do this, even though you know maybe these other things are going to happen. So that's where I'm kind of going in terms of the slight difference. What about the metaphor part of the question then? So when you hear the word courage or see the word courage, what images come to mind and what sounds come to mind and what feelings come to mind?
It's when you talk of sounds, and when I think of courage, I think the thing that resonates more with me is silence, actually. And it's not someone who's going to stand on the top of a mountain and say, yes, I did that. And that definitely took courage. It took determination. It took a lot of practice and all of that. But it's the most of us who are the quieter ones and are slowly and, surely getting to where they need to, despite all of the obstacles around them. I think for me, silence resonates most with courage.
Do you know, I just had one of those moments then because of all the words in the whole world that you could have chosen, silence was the word in my head as well. And
Awesome.
that's kind of a bit spooky. And especially when courage sometimes is seen by so many people as quite loud. So interesting that the two of us would go in the other direction. And yeah, apart from the sound of silence, there's also a very strong feeling that's attached to that silence for me of kind of steeliness and resolve.
Okay.
So it's this thing about I've assessed the situation. This is what needs to be done. I don't need to make a song and a dance about it. Here I go. And it's just that very serious go do it kind of thing.
And that's it. It's grit. You know what you need to do. You put your head down and work, and silently, with grit, with determination, or with a straight, steadfast goal, and you get there. And what you need to get there is courage.
Yeah. Now I'm curious about so the word grit has come up a number of times, right? And recently I ran a ValuesJam deep dive into the topic of education. And I don't know, do you know Mayank Solanki?
Yes, I've worked with him for the last 7 years, and I've worked with valid initiatives.
Right, okay. So, at the beginning, you know what it's like on Zoom calls that are scheduled on Eventbrite. You get people that register, and then sometimes the people that have registered don't show up, and don't know when they're going to show up. So, Mayank was going to introduce the topic of education just as a kind of warm up, and we only had two other people on the call at the beginning. And so I gave everybody the opportunity to either continue or did everybody want to have that time back and make better use of it? And so people said, no, we want to carry on. And then actually somebody else joined the call. And Mayank started to say, Alan, he said something like, you're one of the people that I know that has more grit than anybody because whether there's 20 people or two people, you just carry on. And it's so what's in my mind at the moment is you and Mayank are both in India. Is grit something that is kind of very high focus generally in society there, or am I misreading that?
No, I think it's extremely important. I think for all of us, whether you're talking of any kind of balance or you're talking of tangible results or you're just talking of you want to just try and figure out what's happening in your life, no matter what, I think grit is one of the number one values we could say, or even life skill. I don't know, it's kind of a mix of both. You need grit only because that is something that tells you you got this, you can do it. You haven't figured it out yet, but we're going to get there. So I do believe grit is definitely very, very important. And I think sometimes people kind of use grit in terms of courage and vice versa.
Yeah, it's that. So I think grit probably describes that silent courage that we were talking about a bit better than the word courage, because, like we were saying earlier, sometimes that's more readily associated with like you said, on the top of the mountain, shouting, "Come on, follow me!" All of that kind of thing. So that's a great start into this topic. So let's get very practical now. And I'd like to ask you, when have you experienced courage? Either yourself displaying it or witnessing somebody else displaying it, anything. And it can be either in a personal setting or in a professional setting.
I think I've witnessed courage personally as well, and at a lot of sessions that I do with young adults, and who somehow have kind of not sure about how they want to go ahead. A lot of them don't have a clue, and you see them working hard and slowly trying to say make their goals, and things are not happening right with their families. They don't have a lot of support, but they know that this is what they want to do in life. There could be financial issues, there could be family trouble. And for youngsters to be able to go through a life struggle and yet consistently, day after day, wake up, do your education, work for your jobs that you're doing, and you know that slow and steady, you're going to get there. I have seen a lot of young adults, and that's why I'm not naming anyone, because I've seen so many. I've worked with a lot of NGOs for less privileged families. And I think the one lesson that working with them over the last 10 years for me has been humility. I think just the sheer learnings that you can get from these young people, and they exemplify grit in some form or the other,
Yeah,
whether it is girls, who are not, who are told to stay at home.
yeah.
Let the boy go or let the brother go and finish his education, but you stay back. And they'll be like, no, I'm going to do everything that you ask me to, and I'm going to get a 90 percentage. And so many of these young kids are now in undergrad colleges all over India, despite their daily struggles, which a lot of us take for granted.
Yeah, and I'm sure there must be lots of research around this topic because I didn't come from a very privileged background, and I feel that that somehow has been the reason why I'm able to do some of the things that I've been able to do because you have that experience of not having everything your own way and having to deal with limited resources, and you carry that with you for a long time. Um, but on the other hand, I remember who Stelios, the Greek tycoon who used to run EasyJet and was the son of the oil baron. I saw him speak at an event, and he came on stage and he said, "Do you know?" And this was first off as his introduction. He said, "You know, sometimes people say to me, Stelios, did it help to have a father who was a billionaire and was able to provide all of this opportunity for you?" And he said, and I say to them, of course it did. You know, he kind of led you to believe that he was going to deny it, but then and so that was very funny. But I don't know, and what experience do you have about how important is that to have been through difficult times in equipping you to be able to do that over and over again?
I think while you were talking also, I think the one word that kept coming to my mind, which we've talked of earlier, is risk. So, someone who's gone through a lot of difficulty early on and they've managed to get out of it through different ways. Not all of them are easy. They're still okay. At the right time, they know the kind of risk they can take. And I feel sometimes people who are a little more privileged, and because they have it so easy, when they're stuck, it's a little difficult. I may be generalizing here,
Yeah.
but I think it's a little more difficult for them because they haven't really gone through it. And if they think they're stuck, there is no way out. Whereas someone who's gone through a difficult time knows that no matter what, I will find another way. I need to get there. So the capability of being a little more of a risk taker and finding interesting ways are probably more for them.
Mm. And then when you talk about taking risks, there's another dimension of this that is interesting, which is some people will be blind. You know, they just go and do something and they're foolish, really, because they're not considering the risk. Then there are those other people that are maybe a bit more aware and still make the decision to do something. And then perhaps at the other end of the scale are those people that overestimate the risk and then don't do things because of what they fear. So that scale is quite challenging to navigate, right? Because it's all
It
unknown.
is. And I think it's different for everybody. And a lot of them, even when we talk of risk right now, I think it's more of an informed risk that you would take,
Yeah,
knowing your limitations,
yeah,
knowing whether I can do it this year or I need to wait for a longer time, right? I think if people find that balance and they have the grit, then they definitely can get there. Otherwise, you're stuck on either end of the spectrum, whether
yeah,
you're not ready to take risks at all, or you're just going all out and probably making a big mistake.
yeah. And then there's another thing there around risk is I don't know why, but what's popped into my head is when I created the Global Poetry Showcase a few years ago, um, I just remember thinking values and poetry would be a brilliant combination. So let's create a global poetry showcase. I don't write poetry, I don't know any poets. And so a little voice was saying, hey, how can you do that? But then my answer was, well, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that it can happen is nobody submits a poem. And so what?
Yeah,
Whereas there are other situations where perhaps there's a lot more at stake. And yet, I don't know, it seems to me that sometimes people build up this thing around, and maybe it's going back to what we were talking about failure. They attach too much importance to failure rather than really understanding what is the worst that can happen.
absolutely. And so if it weren't for Alan, right, we wouldn't have something like values and poetry, right? So obviously it is an informed risk. And I think if you know your limitations and you know what you want to do, and obviously what's at stake, right? But other than that, I think more than thinking of failure, if we were to just think, all right, this may not go down that well, but I'm definitely going to learn because my goal stays the same. So instead, as you said, instead of focusing on the aspect of failure, what did I do right? That's also something to be proud of. And what could I have done better? So we need to change from the output to the journey to the efforts and learn from those.
Yeah, that's so true. And actually, here's another part of this. So I'll do it in a very quick way. So this is the journey from the Global Poetry Showcase, and I'll tell you where it's got to now. So it started with the Global Poetry Showcase, and then 2 years later, I thought, oh, what about doing something similar for the visual arts? And
Mhm.
so then a voice said, how can you fly art around the world? That will be a nightmare. So the answer was a virtual exhibition. Then, as a result of that, I got connected with a charity and we created the Voices of Tomorrow program, and we got funding from a foundation. And then, as a result of working with those guys, we've now created a virtual reality business, and we've got our first client who is switching their artwork from an Instagram account to our virtual reality space. Now, imagine the beginning was the Global Poetry Showcase, the end is a virtual reality business. There is no way that at the beginning you could have foreseen what that point might be. So there is also something about courage not being needed as much, actually, because courage assumes foresight, perhaps. Whereas actually, what happens, what unfolds, is often very different than you might have expected, right?
Absolutely. And that's where you keep reinventing the wheel, as they say, in your journey. And if you have only two options that you're thinking of, and you think of the third one, but you'll still need the courage, Alan, to work on the two new ones. So I think it's always there with you. It's just about innovation at the right time during your journey, maybe changing course to get to a different goal. But eventually, to get to from your global poetry to the visual arts business, you still needed some aspect of courage and grit to say, all right, let me now think about this a little more.
Yeah. There's something actually counterintuitive coming to mind now because I think a lot of the time when we talk about courage, it's about um, a really strong intent to get where you said you were going to get. Whereas that story that I've just told you was almost the opposite. It was almost the courage to go somewhere different rather than maintain that first direction. So I don't know what that's all about, but any thoughts on that about how we sometimes become too obsessed with where we've made a decision to go, whereas in fact, there's lots of opportunity around us that unless we look around, we maybe don't see.
Uh, the other aspect of courage, in fact, what you just shared, could be instead of a very strong, steely intent, as you said, you have a quiet flow, you have a quiet intent that I know I'm getting somewhere. I just need to make it a little more real. And then you start detailing your process, right?
Yeah,
So it doesn't always have to be that rigorous uh, definition of courage that we are always told or we're conditioned with, right? But you just know you're going to get there and quietly. So I think instead of saying strong intent, we could just say, just quietly with the balance of what's at stake, what do I know, and what I don't know, all work in that favor.
yeah. And you've reminded me, there's a lady called Fabienne Vales who operates in the education space. She's French. And of course, courage originates from the French cœur for heart. And so, what you're just describing there in terms of this kind of alternative definition of courage feels like having the confidence to follow your heart being courage. So, there's
Beautifully said, Alan.
a nice connection there. All right, now in Values Jam, Minal, there's an opportunity for you to create your own question. So I'd like to invite you to do that about courage using who, what, where, when, why, or how to start the question. And if you have the answer immediately, please do share that. Or if you prefer, I can go first. So what's your question?
I'll take a moment actually to
Yeah.
frame my question on courage. So you can go first, Alan.
Well, so sorry, it's your question we're going to play with, and either I can answer it first or you can answer it first. So the starting point is your question.
Okay, then what would we be as individuals without courage?
What would we be? Do you know, I'm joking now, but a failure.
You don't like those words, Alan?
No, I don't like that word. That's why I was using it. But it feels to me that without courage, we're almost nothing. Because it's courage that makes us what we are. And there's another connection, Fatem Banshoib. She says that courage is the most important value because without it, you can't practice the others, which is an interesting point of view. So I'm trying to give you a bit more though. So if it wasn't for courage, what would we be? I think we would be selling ourselves short. That's the other thing. And we would not be realizing our potential. So it's this thing about limiting self beliefs. We would be so much smaller without courage than we could be. But that's not to say that you have to be. Nobody's saying that it's easy to have courage from the beginning. So the way that I would kind of frame that is that it's again a journey of small steps, and you just need to be a bit, have a show a bit more courage in a small area, and then try again and again and again, rather than feel that you have to make this sudden switch from being maybe not too sure to being full of courage. So I hope that's given you something to play with, and I'm curious about your answer to that question.
So I think the one thing that comes to my mind also is if you don't have courage, then somehow we lose hope. we don't have hope.
Yeah,
And
great.
I think that's also a very important value that we need to go on. And it doesn't mean to, achieve huge milestones, but just to be there and take it one day at a time. Also, you need hope, right? And I think courage plays a big part in that as well. As you said, so I love to talk of this spiral theory that I talk with my clients, and we do a little bit, and then you feel a little better. And then you go going up the spiral and you feel a little better, you do a lot more. Without courage, the spiral is downward because you're not doing anything. So you're definitely not feeling very good. And then you have that sense of no hope. And, that's how it is. So I think it's a play of courage and hope, both, maybe.
Yeah, it's so with there's a guy called Kevin Monroe who operates in the gratitude space, and I often kind of tease him that kindness and gratitude are besties, because they are so complementary to each other. And when you started to, I hadn't really thought about the relationship between courage and hope before, but now I'm thinking about it. I think of them as sisters,
Yes.
because really close sisters, because one leads to the other. And hope is the starting point, right? So if with courage you can have hope, then that leads you to action. Whereas courage on its own, without hope,
Yes.
maybe doesn't lead you to maybe not the right action anyway. Yeah, what an interesting relationship between those two values. I've never thought about that. So thank you so much for that. And
Thank you, Alan.
another question, let's go big now. How could more courage improve the world?
Oh, that's a good one. We're going global now, but I think just the courage to be true to ourselves and to be able to, especially in today's times when there's so much of conflict and chaos and just, the sheer aspect of what is right or wrong. Even if each one of us just decides to put our foot down on saying this is right and let's do this, or this is wrong, right? There would be conflicts, there would be differences in values for each people, each person. But the fact that when you see something wrong, if we have the courage to not stay quiet, I mean, I think we'll be giving our world, our future generation, such a beautiful place. There'll be more harmony, there'll be more inclusiveness, right? And there'll just definitely be a lot more kindness and empathy, right? You're thinking about the other person, that maybe that person's not feeling good because someone's not being nice to them. Does someone around have the courage to say, don't do that? It could be for one person, it could be for a society, it could be for a group, right? So
Yeah, this space of right and wrong, because I agree with you kind of fundamentally about do the right thing. But then I've got a bit of a stone in my shoe about how in the world today we seem to be really quick to judge other people
absolutely.
and through our perspective rather than be more curious. And so in this space of right and wrong, I think the world could be improved by people having the courage to let go a little bit of what they think is right and wrong, to explore somebody else's point of view, to really understand why. Why are you taking that position rather than the one that I think you should be taking? Um, And it's also raising a question. Why do you think you said at the beginning of that, the courage to be ourselves? And I think that, if we could be ourselves, the world would be so much a better place. And yet there are so many forces and so many pressures from society to be something other than ourselves. So how do we deal with that? You must come across that a lot, especially dealing with young people.
I think social media doesn't help at all because you really lose the essence of who you are. And sometimes before you even find yourself, you've changed yourself
Yeah.
to fit into the mold of someone you admire, maybe, or just because the rest of the world is following them. Right? So when I say courage to be ourselves, it's also, as you said, when I talked of inclusivity, right? You be yourselves without judging someone else, right? Or without getting affected by the forces around us, whether it is social media or someone is saying you need to do it this way,
Hmm.
right? So then you have the courage to say, maybe this doesn't work for me. I may, not agree with that person and they're going to be upset about it. But if I stay true to myself, I know I'll be all right. And I'll probably be happier in whatever space that I have created for myself. And I think courage for ourselves is number one because we are lost today. I think the youngsters are just following whatever trend that comes in and, they lose the essence of who they should be probably.
Yeah, it's I think it must be a really tough situation because yes, I think we're both saying to be yourself is a positive thing, but then I remember, I'm sure you do as well, at times maybe when you're younger, maybe actually when you're older, there is a lot of pressure to fit in
Absolutely.
because if you're different, then maybe you're ostracized or you're not included, and so then that doesn't serve you well either. So it's kind of it's a catch 22, isn't it? It's like, do I stay strong to this principle of being myself and not fit in very easily? Or do I fit in and then hope that I've got the courage to hold on to who I really am and then allow that to come out over time when you've been accepted a bit more, maybe? And where is the line between how far you're able to go?
So that's when you say you're true to yourself, right? If you find the balance, there are a couple of things that you say, you know what, it's all right. It's not going to change me completely. And I'm all right to do that without really having to alter your innate values that you really believe in, for example, just because a group of friends are doing something else,
Yeah.
right? Or you're seeing something else on uh, Instagram or on social media. So if you find the balance, yet having the courage to say no when you need to, maybe that's when it's going to be easy to fit in and still be able to do your own thing. That, you know what, I'm going to do this up to this point, and then I think I'm going to just do this my way.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying there is that as long as you're making conscious choices,
Absolutely.
then that's okay. And actually, it's reminded me. It was a webinar, and it was about values. And one of the callers said something like, "Do your values ever conflict with each other?" And I'm not so good at explaining things in theory. I prefer to tell stories. So I found myself saying to this guy, imagine that there's a couple, a young couple, and the man is a pacifist, and his other core value is family. And he and his partner have a newborn child. And this guy is unemployed. So he's unable to put food on the table for his family. And then he gets offered a job to work in an ammunition factory. So what does he do? And in the end, he might decide that in order to put food on the table for his family, he will take the job in the ammunition factory. But for every hour that he's not working, he will look for a job so he doesn't have to work in that place.
Absolutely.
So that's this thing about as long as you work through your thought process with your values at the root of it and arrive at the decision that you're happy with, then you can be comfortable with that, right?
Absolutely. And the examples that you gave, he's consciously looking out for something else because he knows that he's not doing something that is aligning with his values.
Yeah.
So he's not decided that he's going to do this forever. He's not stopped looking at for another job. right?
Yeah.
And that's where you can still be at peace and try and find a balance between what you want to do versus sometimes what we must do or we need to do.
Yeah. And this reminds me, you remember earlier we talked about time and how much importance we attach to time. That seems relevant here as well in this example because, like we say, let's say that guy worked in the ammunition factory for 6 months, and let's imagine that he grows to be 60 years old and he's talking to his grown-up child about the 6 months that he had to work in an ammunition factory to put food on the table for when that child was a baby. 6 months is nothing in our lives, right? And yet, maybe other people with a different mindset would have beaten themselves up or not taken that job, got into a terrible situation. Um, yeah, so this time has a lot to answer for, I think.
Yes, and I think for that person who lived those 6 months, knowing that he doesn't want to do that, it definitely will always be there. And the impact of those 6 months, that time, will always be a lot more profound, right? Because he knows he's consciously choosing, but this is something he needs to do for his family. So here, all he can say is, right, his family was his utmost preference. But it doesn't say that those 6 months have been easy for him at all.
Yeah, this is weird because we're talking about a hypothetical situation, but I'm getting quite emotionally invested in
Yeah.
the story because I'm
Yes.
thinking, actually, there is almost a case for saying that having worked in that ammunition factory for 6 months, he probably understands even better why peace is so important to him,
Absolutely.
rather than it be an ideology. You know, he might have handled shells or bullets and
Absolutely.
yeah,
And he's had a first-hand experience of the devastation that it can cause, right?
yeah,
Without just reading it in papers or knowing that in theory.
yeah,
So he definitely have worked for the next 50 years of his life away from all of that
yeah,
in maybe different ways, joining NGOs or talking to people and, sharing his stories or, right? In his mind, trying to undo maybe what he was forced to do for those 6 months.
yeah.
This person's almost become real, right?
I know it's so strange, and I think this is a great time to bring our values jam to a close because it feels to me that we couldn't do any better than finish on this story that we've just been talking about and the kind of really deep lessons that we can learn from that. So there is always one final question, and that is this: what are you encouraged to do differently about courage as a result of our conversation today?
I think for me, courage will always be the silent force and not the brutal one. And if we were to really look inside, all of us have that courage and strength. So we don't have to outwardly show it and feel good for the sake of the other people around. And what takes you really, really long ahead in your goals or in your life is that steely, silent reserve that we have.
Yeah.
So for me, courage is about that silent strength,
Okay.
if you want to put that.
And so, when might you have the first opportunity to practice that more silent version of courage?
I'm doing that now as a parent of a teenager because there's so many things you want to say and you want to talk to them and you want them to talk to you. And sometimes you just need to be silent and tell yourself, okay, it's fine. When things go a little crazy, they're going to come to us, right? Till then, I need to have the courage and the faith in my parenting, and that's all. And I think as a mom, that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm a parent too, and I've always attached a lot of importance to allowing my children freedom to make choices, not necessarily agreeing with all of them,
Yes.
but recognizing that I don't live their life, they live their life, and they need to be able to do that. So I'm with you 100% on that. For me, what's come out of today is to recognize that courage gives you the opportunity to experience things that might not be comfortable. But even though they're not comfortable, it doesn't mean to say they're not valuable.
Absolutely.
And so I tend to be a half glass full type person anyway. But now I'm thinking after this conversation with you that even when things feel not good, there is something good coming from it, like the 6 months in the ammunition factory. That's crazy that we're going to use that guy. Thank you so much for that. I feel like the week is starting with a lot of power, actually. Um, so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you to you on this conversation about courage.
Thank you very much, Alan, for having me on this Values Jam. It's been an interesting conversation and creating our own stories, actually. So the ammunition guy is going to stay with me for a while now, I think.
Yeah. Okay, bye now.
Thanks a lot, Alan. Bye bye.
Bye.